From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, KG, to everyone in our Canberra team. All right, now, no more BS, no more mucking around, no more sitting on the fence. The barefoot investor, Scott Pape, is a man who many people turn to for some financial advice or somebody they read often. He today did the first thing he's done in 20 years when it comes to a federal budget. He didn't bother going to Canberra because, as you have all learnt by now, it's all handed out and leaked and mentioned, and even the budget surplus was known in the papers this morning. He refers to it essentially as sort of really boring political theatre. And in that spirit, let's begin this evening, while we will get serious and we'll have our debates, let's also poke fun at these people who pretend they are changing anyone's life. When, of course, all this document is about every year, regardless of who the politician is, it's about saving their backside. About telling you that your world's going to get better because, woo, $75 every 3 months. You know, this garbage. Jim Chalmers did something that no treasurer I have seen in the past has done. He invited the cameras in to watch him, like a gladiator, leave his office and walk into the parliament. And it's the best bit of TV I've seen since Goldberg was wrestling back in WCW.
This is an intimidating sight. If you're an opponent in the ring, you can see on the large screens the long walk that he has from the ring. Wait a minute. I can see from my vantage point here, Ivan Dallas is standing in the opposite corner. His head's down. He's leaning against the rope. He's deep in concentration. He's not watching Goldberg come out here. He's in himself.
Without the pyro, and not quite as interesting and probably just as fake. Now, tonight we're going to have an all-star panel of Sky News mates and friends and colleagues. I'm so pleased Chris Kenny and Andrew Bolt are here. I'm so pleased we're going to have the Team Red, Team Blue. You'll hear a lot of reaction that's coming in as well. But right off the top, our budget tradition, the 5 things you need to know about this federal budget. Number 1, the reality here is that every household getting a $300 power rebate means that you, in actual fact, are going to be paying for millionaires to be able to take $300 off their power bills. The Treasurer, in order to take a line politically out of this budget, has said every household will get $300. Wait till I tell you how that $300 is being doled out.
Just as every Australian taxpayer will get a tax cut, every Australian household will get energy price relief. Yeah. From July 1, Australians will receive an energy rebate of $300 and 1 million small businesses will get a little bit more.
That's right, this bloke who thinks he'll be the Prime Minister one day, the working class hero, thinks there is no difference in cost of living pain between this house in the suburbs of his own electorate or this house and every other mansion in the country. That's what every household means. Now, the reality is that people at the rich end of town have largely been the ones that have been spending and spending and spending. They're still going on overseas holidays, they're still buying new tellies, while people at the other end are cutting back on medicine, cutting back on food. And because the Reserve Bank only has one lever to pull, they put up the rates. In part, that's why, because of the spending that has been done by those who have the money to spend, to slow the entire economy, you, in suburban Australia, have had the python around you. 13 times in all, but a dozen since this government came to power. Also, the reality of all of this. Now, they're going to get the headline, and it's going to cost billions of dollars of taxpayers' money, that $300 power bill gift from the federal government. But as Andrew Clennell explained in our coverage a little earlier this evening, this is how it will actually work, and maybe the fireworks just become a bit of a sparkler that's running out.
And you get 75 a quarter, all of us. You know, Gina Reinhardt gets it, Twiggy Forrest gets it, we all get it. Everyone watching gets it. And I think it just rolls pretty much straight onto your bill.
Wow. I don't know about you, but I will never forget this day. Just like the great days in history where you know where you were. Well, you will forever say to yourself, where was I on the 14th of May in 2024? when this government ended the cost of living crisis by handing power companies $75 a quarter. You don't get the money and then if you choose to spend it on something else, you can. No, it goes to the power companies. The lefties will blow up about it because it's fossil fuel companies. But that's the change to your life. Because just like tax cuts, you don't pay an annual power bill. You pay a quarterly one. And if you pay a monthly one, it's $25. Wow! Thank you, Dr. Jim. You've solved all my problems. What this is actually about is about trying to get around this key broken promise of the last election, the one when the Prime Minister said this.
Households will benefit by $275 on average. Reducing power prices by $275. Prices by $275. $275. $275 a year. $275. $275 a year.
See, because they think you're stupid, they think you have no memory. They think somehow they can tell you, they can gaslight you on a detail enough that you will forget the reality. Power prices, since those promises were made, are up by the best part of $1,000. Oh, so they're going to find a way to bring it down for 1 year only, for $300. Oh, and that's better than our 275 promise. No, the 275 promise was on the power prices of May in 2021, not on the power prices of May 2024. And when challenged on the 275 number, this is what the Treasurer said to, again, Kieran Gilbert in our coverage earlier tonight.
The number you're referring to was a forecast in 21 about an outcome in 25. We're providing energy bill relief in the here and now. We did in the last budget. We are again in the next budget, but there'll be more relief for more people in this budget.
No, that wasn't modelling. That was a promise. One so much so that we could fill the entire extra 30 minutes of this show in the full 90 minutes to show you how many times they said it. But now they didn't say it, and $25 a month is apparently going to make you completely forget that your power bill has gone up by how much since this mob came to power? Number two, no matter the spin, what we've told you about the tax cuts remains as true today as the first day we said it. In the real world, the tax cuts are too little too late. They do not change the lived experience of Australians. Now, for workers around the country, they don't pay their tax annually. You pay your tax weekly, fortnightly, or monthly. So when they turn around and talk about the big number about the end of the year, that's not how you actually pay tax. So in the same way they're going to say $300 off power bills, it's not $300 off power bills, it's $25 a month off power bills. And you don't get the money, the power company gets the money. The reality of the too little too late tax cut was that if you earn $45,000, you're only going to get $15 a week. $22 a week if you earn 60 grand, $32 a week if you earn 80 grand, or $41,000 if you earn $41 if you earn $100,000. I won't be that generous to them. That'll be next year's giveaway if they're still waiting for an election. But again, the Treasurer who has been spinning the annual figure, the penny has dropped, that the lived experience of people and why they don't buy the BS about the tax cuts is because you pay it weekly, fortnightly or monthly. So by the Treasurer's own admissions, he now says what the average figure is going to be for the tax cut per week, and think about whether this even touches the sides of the middle of the financial problems you're facing.
The average benefit is $1,888 a year, which is $36 a week. Our tax cuts are better for families and communities, women and young people. They are better for business and they are better for the economy.
Now, remember how way back when the Howard government handed out a tax cut and they were able to break it down by the 52 weeks a year, it was a milkshake and a hamburger. Well, this might be slightly more generous, but it, again, doesn't change your life. Let me put this in terms that Australians will understand. The number one beer in the country is Great Northern. You cannot buy a case of Great Northern with this tax cut each week. And if you're somebody who really has the backside out of their strides, you wouldn't even be able to afford a six-pack a week of Great Northern. So they will go around the country saying everyone gets a tax cut. It's not enough for a case of beer. Everyone gets a power cut. You're paying power companies to subsidise millionaires. And even if you think it's a good idea, it's $25 a month. Number three, the budget doesn't actually put out the other inflation fires. Now, obviously, look, I don't want to be crass, but imagine the least effective amount of liquid that you can put towards a fire, and this is even less. Why? Because despite the fact that Jim Chalmers said this as many times as he possibly could during his speech,
Cost of living, 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 cost of living.
in the last month, the inflation figures on a whole bunch of things that Australians have to pay for are way higher than the dream of somewhere between 2 and 3% inflation. Have a look. Tobacco is up 12%. Insurance is up 8%. Fuel is up 8%. Rent is up 7%. Bread and cereal, alcohol and tobacco, non-alcoholic, housing, electric, you go on and on and on and on and on. Nothing in this budget helps you pay those bills. Nothing. And if they think that the not even case of beer tax cut is enough, well, guess what? It's immediately washed out by any one of those other increases, including petrol tax, that they have refused to cut. And wait till I explain why in a moment or two's time. 4, smokers, drinkers and drivers. Congratulations, thank you. There's a cuddle in the mail. Why? Because you are the only reason this mob can post a surplus. The surplus is $9.3 billion. It's the first back-to-back surplus in decades, and isn't Jim Chalmers amazing, and all the rest of it. I'll get to the future in a second. But that $9.3 billion is only achieved because the taxes they got this year, or that they expect to get this year, out of petrol is $7.3 billion, which is why they won't cut the petrol tax. Diesel, $17.4 billion, which is why they won't cut that fuel tax. Tobacco, $11.5 billion, which in and of itself alone keeps them in surplus. Literally, the tobacco tax in Australia is the only reason we're in a surplus. Hardly gold stars for great economic management, right? Let alone the beer, which your tax cut still can't afford if we're talking about a case or a 60, if you're earning 45 grand. Or spirits, where remember, a bottle of Bundy rum is more than 60% tax. The total, $42 billion in petrol, diesel, tobacco, beer and spirit taxes. That's the only reason they're in a surplus, and the only reason the deficit isn't $30 billion today. Which brings me to point number 5. Things are going to get worse, and I mean really worse in the next little while. Buried inside the documents, something nobody will say in the little 5-minute guide to the budget on the website. The expectation of an interest rate cut is nothing this year. It's in fact not until the middle of next year. So currently, people who are having to find anywhere between an extra $15,000 and $30,000 to pay off their home, no relief whatsoever. But please vote for us because every household gets a power bill cut. Every worker gets a tax cut. And in terms of jobs, a shocking number of Australians are going to lose their job in the next 12 months. It's not me saying it, it's the Treasurer saying it in the speech.
Slower growth means a softer labour market, with unemployment expected to rise slightly to 4.5% next year, even as we create tens of thousands of new jobs.
Let me explain it this way. Current unemployment, 3.9%. Expectation in this budget is that it goes up to 4.5. It stays above 4 as far as the eye can see. If we hit a 4.5% unemployment rate, that's 103,600 people who will lose their jobs. Oh, but every household gets a power bill and every worker's going to get a tax cut. And then there's the actual government itself. Because, as I've shown you, the only way they got to surplus, even with all of those taxes, guess how deep they're going to go into deficit next year, the year after, and as far as the eye can see. Have a look at this. This year's surplus is $9.3 billion. Next year's deficit is $28 billion. The year after that, 42 billion, then 26 billion, because magically everything changes, and then $24 billion. So while the Treasurer will say, how good have I been? I've saved a bit of money on the debt. OK, let's say 100% of what he says is true. So the 80 billion they've apparently cut from the debt will now be replaced by an increase in federal government debt that will now take us to 1.2 trillion. All those deficits added together on top of the current debt takes us to $1.1 trillion. Oh, but there's a power cut for every household and there's a tax cut for every worker. That won't be able to change anything about your life. So those are my 5 things. I'm keen to know what yours are too. Send me an email, paul@skynews.com.au. Here are my dear friends and colleagues from the Kenny Report, which you can see 5 o'clock Eastern each and every night. Primetime starts with the great Chris Kenny. Mate. None other than the king amongst us. The great Andrew Bolt joins us as well. Lads, let's get through all of this. So, anything I missed, Chris?
No, you're on the money there. I'm never going to complain about your smoke again and your cigars.
Thank you.
I'm going to slap you on the back and thank you for keeping the country going. Look, this is a government that was prepared to sell out Israel to try and save a handful of seats. So why would we be surprised that they sell out the entire budget strategy to try and win an election? This is quite extraordinary. They're maintaining historically high levels of taxation, historically high levels of spending, historically high levels of debt. And they say they're going to cut immigration, but they're going to keep immigration at historically high levels. So all of the concerns that people have are only going to be exacerbated in coming years, and it's all pitched. They pick a slogan and an election campaign ad, and then they find our billions of dollars to pay for it. That's what I think of this election. It's all about slogans funded by our tax dollars.
My oath. Andrew Bolt joining us from Melbourne. Great man, lovely to see you. Tell me your thoughts, and did I get anything wrong?
No. The basic bottom line is we've got good times, despite the Treasurer trying to tell us, oh, the overseas situation's not too good, which has been saying every single budget. If there's something wrong here, it's caused by overseas, never by Labor. Things are pretty good. We've got record amounts of tax coming into the government's coffers. And what does the Treasurer produce? 4 more years of deficits, $112 billion added to the reading that this country's already in. I find that unbelievable. And also, he says unemployment's going to get worse, inflation's a little bit sticky, but by the way, he says, I've just cut it by 0.5% through this rent subsidy and this energy subsidy. By the way, both of them are compensating for Labor mistakes by taking money out of one of your pockets and putting it back in the other pocket, and you're supposed to feel better off. I mean, what a joke. Look, the whole thing is, he says, the Treasurer's big hope, right, is that this budget has taken pressure off the Reserve Bank and made it possible to lift, to cut interest rates and cut your mortgage payments as well through that. In fact, it won't, because what it does, this is the biggest con in the budget. He has given this subsidy, the rent and the money for to compensate for the increases in your power bills thanks to global warming policies. People that are hard up, what do you think they're going to do with extra money? They're going to spend it. What's the Reserve Bank trying to do? Take money out of the economy. The government's just added money to the economy. This is going to mean the cut in interest rates that the government's hoping for will be delayed. This is just smoke and mirrors. More debt, more joblessness, and higher interest rates for longer. That is what the government has done with record income coming in. I can't believe it.
Yeah, let's put us in boxes, guys, because I want everyone to be able to have a chat, talk across each other. It's mates talking on the telly to our mates watching at home, all right? So feel free, butt in at any time, lads, of course. Chris, about the power side of things, there's a dirty little trick also in here. Remember, Chris Bowen has effectively done the trick with the NBN, which is to move tens of billions of dollars off the budget, so we never see it, but you still have to borrow money for it, right, in order to build the renewable infrastructure that that in part has now seen, and the cost of transition, building this stuff, is why people's power bills in part have gone up. I mean, they can talk about Ukraine as much as they want. The moving from the car with 4 wheels to the car with 3 wheels and telling us it'll break the lap record at Bathurst that's the cost of transition. It's $1 trillion. Yet they turn around now and say, well, we're going to light the fire and compensate you for the fire. It reminds me of Gillard with the carbon tax. We'll introduce a tax and compensate you for it.
Well, it's like they're treating us as hostages, you know, and they're denying us our liberties, and then they're saying, oh, here you are, here's a little glass of water, be grateful for us. The national self-harm here in this energy policy is extraordinary. We have got historically high, the highest electricity prices we've ever had in this country. The reason we've got them is because Labor and other governments have been subsidising renewables. They've been subsidising the transmission to connect the renewables. They've been subsidising the batteries to try and store the renewables. Then they realised that they didn't have enough energy, so they're now subsidising the coal generators to try and maintain the power. And they've given us this unprecedented electricity cost burden. So now they're subsidising people's power bills to try and let us get through the power price increases they've inflicted on us. And to make it worse, as you pointed out, these subsidies, which will pay the power bills partially on behalf of us to the power companies, will go to millionaires as well. They will go to millionaires. Malcolm Turnbull, Kate Blanchett, Clive Palmer, they will get the $300 rebate. It's obscene and absurd.
Well, but also, remember what they were doing, this Labor Party complaining, Andrew, about when paid parental leave and Tony Abbott was trying to put in place. Oh, we're subsidising of the millionaires and all the rest of it. but the argument of Jim Chalmers is, oh, well, cost of living affects everyone up and down the power scale, up and down the economic scale. I think this is going to be an issue. I mean, you see that the Liberal Party in their early response tonight is that they're going to wave it through because they don't want to get caught in the they voted against power relief thing. But then you heard some of those senators saying, this isn't going to work. Is this going to be the ambered claim that means the compensation goes through and the Senate will amend it, or they just think that the politics becomes so difficult because Peter Dutton voted against a reduction in power bills for every Australian household?
Listen, a lot of the millionaires you're talking about, of course, were dudded of the tax cuts that they were promised 4 or 5 years ago now. It won't make up, it'll make up a tiniest fraction of the bracket creep that has given the government billions and billions more. So I'm not going to be too upset that people, who pay the vast majority of the country's taxes are going to get $300 back. Whoopee-doo. I mean, the basic bottom line is, here is Labor unable to curb its spending. And also, to pick up on what Chris was saying, he's quite right. We've had all these green policies inflicted on us to insulate us from just a fraction of that pain. They're giving a $300 bailout on energy bills. That's it, right? But meanwhile, they're doubling down with a Hail Mary, double your bets or nothing, bet the house on your last race, green hydrogen.
Yeah.
The happiest man in Australia with this budget is Andrew Forrest. A billionaire green investor.
He gets the power bills on green energy.
Thinking,
billions of dollars of subsidies and a $300
green
rebate.
hydrogen. No, but it's conned the government into backing green hydrogen in this budget, right? Our government's already tried to back other forms. They tried geothermal power, which was supported by Tim Flannery, flopped, failed. They tried wave generators, 3 projects, all failed. They've tried all sorts of things. Solar and wind aren't cutting it. So they've got to go for more gas explosion. Their big Hail Mary now, we're going to invest not in that wicked nuclear power, it's going to be in green hydrogen, which has been proven at scale nowhere in the world. And it's pouring tens of billions of dollars into this stuff, which is a gamble. And that apparently is going to fix your power bills and solve the lack of power in this country caused by net zero policies. It won't. It's a disaster. And boy, we'll get the bill later down the track.
I've been relentless on this for as long as we've had access to the microphone, that Again, I'm not going to use the crudism, but you know that concept of being wet upon from up high and they tell you it's rain. I get this feeling, right, that, again, when you're sitting around and you're putting together a budget, the Treasury's all very excited because $1 billion here and $1 billion there and 6.4 billion here, and they're able to sit back and say, well, you know, the tax cuts cost us $100 and whatever billion over 10 years, and the power bill relief, it costs X billion dollars over years. But I go back to the lived experience of the consequences of the promise, right? Now, all of that means they've got a talking point, right? And they're going to hammer it and hammer it and hammer it and hammer it about every household and every worker. But Chris, one of the reasons I've relentlessly talked about too little too late when it comes to the tax cut is if at the moment your average power bill in Australia, I'm looking at one of those consumer websites, is $1,900 a year, the $300 you're not going to notice, right? Because it comes out in $75 chunks. If the average tax cut is $39 a week, are you going to notice it? Now, instantly people are going to say, well, hang on, what about the people on ultra low incomes? Well, yes, those people will notice, but it won't change their life. And that's what annoys me. Because the politics is, we've changed your life. They have not.
No, they haven't, but any tax cut is a good tax cut, and these are coalition tax cuts effectively, although Labor reshaped them and made sure that nobody over 147 grand, I think, gets as much as they were going to get, and that takes away the aspiration. But the thing here is, with the electricity rebate, right, they're doing nothing. As Andrew said, they're doubling down on these green programs. They're investing tens and tens of billions of dollars of our money into more of these Hail Mary programs, and they won't look at the reliable energy we need. So our energy crisis is going to continue. Power bills are going to continue to go up. They're doing nothing about the fundamentals. So this one year $300 rebate that doesn't even make up for how much they've increased in the last 2 years is just going to disappear like piss in the wind. Sorry to be so crude.
No, please.
And the fundamental problem only gets worse. It can only get worse. It will only get worse. And Labor there's not a policy in this budget that seems to cast its mind more than 6 months down the track.
Well, so let's talk about the future here, Andrew, where if they're telling us now that it's deficit next year, deeper deficit the year after that, that they've saved us from the debt of the evil Morrison government. Remember, this is the bloke who, when he was the Shadow Treasurer, wanted the taxpayer to buy Virgin Airlines, okay? They wanted that to go even deeper, JobKeeper to go forever, all the rest of it, right? But still, this government is going to be the one that's going to take us over $1 trillion. It's going to take us to 1.1 trillion in the next couple of years. Now, the politics they're going to try to play here is, oh, well, the deficit we said was going to be really bad, but it's only this bad next year, or we were able to squeeze it into a surplus. But if the reality of the key economic document that the government has said is 100,000 people lose their jobs and the country's going to owe $1.1 trillion, how does anyone who even wants to hold water for the Labor Party say this is a great document?
I know. I mean, it's the most dishonest budget, the craziest budget I've seen forever. For federal budget, I mean, the Victorian state budget takes some believing too. But federally, this is the most amazing budget I've seen. And it's based on deceit. I mean, to pick up on what Chris is saying, right? Here we've had green policies, and there's state and federal Labor green policies on global warming have caused power prices to go through the roof. And the government says, to compensate for that idiocy that we have created, we are going to give you $3 billion. That's $300 per household, $300 per household, relief from your power bills of money that we're actually taking from you. I mean, in what universe is it power? Is it relief to have money taken from you and then given back to you to compensate for the extra, even more money that you've had to pay because of this government's errors? And let's not forget the other handout here of the debt relief, which is $1.3 billion more. I mean, the money that they're just chucking out that is for low-income people who are struggling to meet their rent. What has caused the explosion in rent?
Immigration.
Another Labor mistake. The immigration. 550,000 people in a single year without building the houses to accommodate them. And so, the mortgages have gone up. House prices have gone up, and also rents have gone up. And to compensate for this Labor error, some people are going to get a little help with their rent relief. I mean, seriously, it is a con. Fix immigration. Fix your power.
They won't do
policies.
This is my point about treating us like hostages, Andrew. It's like they want us all to be dependent on some government handout or some government rebate. No matter how much they punish us with their bad policies, we're supposed to be grateful for the little crumbs they throw back at us of our money. It's outrageous, and hopefully people will start to see through it.
But as you said, Chris, right? You know, if I saw some repentance in this budget, I'd say, oh well. Thank heavens they've seen the error of their ways. No, they're compensating us, yes, for their global warming policies, but doubling down on them. And on immigration, they say, all right, you know, you got us. We're going to halve the immigration rate. When they halve the immigration rate, know this, it'll still be more than double the long-term immigration that we've had. It'll still be much more than we need. It'll still drive prices, rents, and house prices through the roof. It'll still crowd your cities. I mean, where is the lessons being learned here?
So let's talk about the question that is being discussed amongst the bubble, which is this the precursor to an election? I think that it gives them a chance at one, right? It's about trying to... Now, again, the Prime Minister will decide when the Prime Minister decides. Now, he's able to do so from August under the rules about when you can have an election, and he can go all the way to a few months into next year. That's the reality, right? But their hope is that tax returns start to change after July, that the first of your bills is slightly down after the first quarter, after July. The hope is that the political message will be boom, boom, boom about every household, every taxpayer. And on top of that, don't forget, they're spending $40 million of your money to remind you about the too little, too late tax cuts and how amazing they are. So, who knows? But Chris, does it seem like they're giving themselves a window if they think this is the moment to go before this year is done?
Undoubtedly, Paul. Now, as you know, I've been saying to you for quite some time that I thought an election later this year is very much on the cards. And one of the reasons I've been saying that is because we've been lucky. The whole country's been lucky with a couple of mild summers. If we get a normal summer, we are going to run short of electricity. We're going to have February, March, where we don't have enough power in this country. That's what all the experts tell us. We've just been lucky with the weather. So I've always thought Labor would be very, very nervous about going to an election on the back of a summer of blackouts and electricity crises. And now take the step back to this budget. All of this plays into it. There's the tax cuts come through, this electricity handout. They'll try and hope that there's a little bit of a dip in inflation for a while, at least that interest rates don't go up between now and Christmas. And you get the Queensland election out of the way in October. And there is a window there for November, late November or even early December. Now, they wouldn't have made up their minds yet. You've got to wait and see how the cookie crumbles. But I think there's absolutely a chance that if these things line up, but before things go pear-shaped for them, they'll try to run off to the polls before the end of the year.
Because again, Andrew, let's talk about the truth here about how Labor views the next election, which is even if they lose a few seats, even if they go in a minority, there's enough people on the crossbench before you get to the Greens that'll be able to prop them up, right? Current news poll, they could lose 4, which puts them 2 into a minority. Well, I mean, literally, Rebecca Sharkey, Bob Katter, there's a whole bunch of options before you start to get to Teals and Greens. And their assumption is the Teals aren't going anywhere, so no matter what happens, no matter what we say, the Liberals can't get anywhere near 76. Given that scenario, does the government then think, OK, we can kind of, put back a little bit in the horse, but it's going to be enough to get us over the line?
Look, they'd rather be in government in coalition with the devil than not be in government at all. But I tell you what, if they're in coalition, if they rely on Green votes, not necessarily in coalition, but, they have to dance to the Greens' tunes, that's going to be terrible for Labor for the next election and terrible for the country. They would rather avoid that. But when an election will be totally now dependent. I mean, as both of you say, there is a window now for an election this year, but it will be totally dependent on two things, or essentially really one. One will be, what are interest rates going to do? If they look like not coming down, the government's in real trouble. If they look like going up, that's fatal. They've got to go before that, absolutely. And the other is, of course, the polls. So it's poll watch now. From now on, it is poll watch. But I have to say, when you have a look at the structure of this, where they're saying it's going to be red ink from now on, 4 years of huge deficits, rising unemployment, maybe not interest rate relief, and this compensation for the power bills will last precisely 1 year. That's it, 1 year. That's all it's for. I don't know that there are many good times coming, particularly if China slows or the money for our exports of iron ore and coal fall even more. So I'd suggest that from now on, it's a live, well, from August or so, it's a very live option. But everything now depends on the polls.
All right. Thank you, guys. Love you both very much. Of course, it's always tough to do it in real time because we don't go into the room and read it all for 7 hours. I appreciate all of the brains you brought to the show this evening. We'll, of course, see you at 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock tomorrow night with the great Peter Credlin on at 6. Thank you, guys. Do appreciate it. All right. Quick break. Back with more. Plenty more to talk about here. 90-minute edition of Paul Murray Live. We go all the way to the next top of the hour. And then the late debate will be here as well. So no one's going anywhere. I hope you've got the nice groove because coming up, Michael Kroger, Joe Hildebrand, who will agree on nothing. Looking forward to that next. Let's keep it going. Special 90-minute edition of Paul Murray Live. Thanks for sticking with us to talk about the budget, the messages, the reality, and a whole lot of nothing that's there as well. Joe Hildebrand, of course, is from the Daily Telegraph, the ear of Albo, to tell us that it's the greatest thing ever. Michael Kroger, the man with his ear to the ground, about how this really works. Let's get to it. Okay, so headline thoughts, Michael, about what they've delivered here, about whether it moves the needle. Is there anything in it that legitimately is a great investment or changes people's minds about the government? What do you think of the budget?
Well, according to the Daily Telegraph poll, 10% think the budget was good or very good, and 75% think it was poor or very poor. That's the online poll at present. So
that's a pretty good result
there's the answer.
For the Daily Telegraph poll.
I think what it tells you is there's less likelihood of an election this year.
Okay.
I think that's very unlikely. Very unlikely.
Yep.
I mean, unless the Reserve Bank reduced rates at the September meeting, Labor can't go to the election without rates having come down. So that's not going to be till early next year, maybe November or December board meeting, if Treasury forecasts are right. But they need rates to drop before they say to the electorate, hey, we know what we're doing. The jury's out at the minute on this fellow Chalmers. Right? He looks good, sounds good. He's not very good, but they don't quite know that. If interest rates don't come down, they can't go to an election because they're going to think, hello, we're being conned.
Yeah, I mean, Joe, again, so that window of an election, I heard your agreement, so I won't waste time asking. But your sense of, does it match the times we're in? Because we know the anger that exists on cost of living.
Yes.
We know what limit government can play. Does it match those times?
Yeah, well, I think the budget's actually meant to do nothing, and that's exactly what it does.
Right.
And that's a good thing. I'll give you an exclusive here. We were thinking about going with Jim Chalmers as Jerry Seinfeld on the front page of the telly and calling it "It's all about nothing." And it kind of is, because he's caught an ultimate economic catch-22. If he delivers relief for cost of living, which people are crying out for, that risks fueling inflation, which then makes things worse in the long term. And if you're an altruist or if you're just trying to win an election in a year's time, that's a very, very, very bad thing. So they can't do that. They don't want to do that, and they're not going to do that. And so you've got people saying in the same breath, often the same people, it's too much spending, it's too inflationary, but it's not enough, it's not providing enough relief. So that, to me, as John Howard said, when both sides are criticising you, shows you've probably got the balance about right. I think the budget is pretty much a holding pattern just to keep things as they are. And just to hope that all those settings that are already in place flow through. Michael is absolutely correct. There is no way on earth the government is going to go to an election before rates start coming down or before inflation,
which is mid next year.
Before inflation gets to, that's right, to about that 3% or below. The other interesting thing, of course, is this discrepancy between the Treasury forecast for inflation and the RBA forecast for inflation. Now, an important thing here, people are saying, well, Treasury's just making it up, Treasury's heroic.
They're both
the justification has been, well, the RBA doesn't know what's in the budget. Well, everyone knows now. But this means that Treasury thinks that far from being inflationary, this budget is actually going to be counter-inflationary, that's actually going to bring inflation down more than if things were basically kept at the status quo. So I think that's an interesting thing as well. But it's like the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. This is a budget that just, whatever it does not want to make things worse.
Yeah, but Michael, just the devil's advocate on all of this, right? Which is the do no harm principle, but also if you don't make anyone happy, if your standing has changed since the last time you asked for the job, then the number of directors that are going to sit around and vote for you falls. And this is a government that doesn't have that huge backbench to be able to go to an election in a diminished position. And it's going to be a relentless theme because it's how I view the world, which is all these big numbers said on TV tonight and announced out of Canberra. But if the lived experience is $75 a quarter off your power bill and $39 a week as a tax cut, when your car insurance has gone up by a couple of $100, when your petrol goes up and can fluctuate by $50 depending on what the week is, but the government's saying, we're doing something, why would anyone believe them?
Mate, Gough Whitlam once said of the Fraser government, it's a government that can't arise above its origins, meaning it got into government, illicitly. Albo can't arise above the origins of his government, which were deeply rooted in those 1,000 or more quotes we've seen of Albo, of Chalmers, the whole Wong, the whole lot of them saying there's a cost of living crisis created by Scott Morrison, right? They kept using that phrase, cost of living crisis. I don't know, mate, I heard it 5 times a day, right? That was the talking point for months and months and months. What did that do? It created the expectation in the minds of the electorate, it's this Scott Morrison, he's terrible. He's created this incredible crisis that Albo will be able to solve because he's got a plan to solve it. Now, the electorate will not be taken for mugs, right? They'll always work you out, as our friend Richo says. What they've worked out is this, that Albanese never had a plan. This was bull dust. Yeah. This was politics. How are we going to undermine Morrison? The polling would have said, hey, people are a bit worried about cost of living. Blame it all on Morrison. Create a sense of crisis. Use the word crisis. In every sentence, crisis has got to be attached to the word cost of living. OK, it was all Morrison's fault. Albo could flick the switch and ease it. Now, so the $275, for example, which will be run by the Liberal Party no doubt a million times during the election, this is his problem. He cannot rise above his origins. He conned people into thinking it was all Morrison's incompetence and he could fix this very easily. Hey, don't even worry about it. The $275, the check's in the mail. That is his main problem, mate. People think he's a liar. People think he's a bull dust artist. People think the promises he made during the election were written on toilet paper. Yep. There was no modelling. Where's the modelling for $275? On and on and on.
Well, and in fact, about that particular promise, this is how Jim Chalmers is going to try to pretend they never made it. Have a look.
The number you're referring to is a forecast in 21 about an outcome in 25. We're providing energy bill relief in the here and now. We did in the last budget. We are again in the next budget, but there'll be more relief for more people in this budget.
Joe, and I'm going to beat up on you, but as somebody who is Labor literate on this, how does this work? Tony Abbott says, vote for me and I'll stop the boats.
Yeah.
You have to stop the boats.
Yeah.
If you say 275, you have to deliver 275. Now, if they say they're going to deliver 300, it's 300 off the high for 1 year only, not a structural change. So are they allowed to really?
Well, I think
that?
that's where it's going. I'm always very wary of making specific predictions of specific amounts at specific times. Unless you're Nostradamus, you're not going to get it. That's right. But what they will say is, well, we've just cut power bills. Every time you said that power bills were going to go down by 275, they can come back and say, well, we've already taken them down by 300.
Yes.
By more than that. We've done that alone. And they're already thinking in that way because they've said that their rental subsidies and the power bill subsidies are actually bringing inflation down. So
by 0.5%.
But it's not even that though, because the way they're framing it is that the government, by absorbing the difference in the cost between what someone otherwise would be paying, is a reduction in inflation, as though the government is sort of playing the role of the market economy. So that's a little bit of sort of rubberiness there. But again, I think that in terms of what people reward the government for or punish it for, again, they're not walking into the ballot box tomorrow or next week. It doesn't matter whether there's a bounce in the polls. What matters is whether people are seeing relief when the government goes to the polls, probably in the later first half of next year. And if there is an interest rate relief by then, or interest rate cut by then, and if inflation is sitting between 2 and 3%, so people think, right, rates are going to keep coming down in the future, right? They're going to look back to that budget, the last one that was handed down, and said, wow, the government got it right. And that is what, if anything, is going to get them over the line. It won't be, this $75 that I'm not really seeing coming off my quarterly power bill, or, as you say, the $20 a week tax cut, or whatever you want to call it.
But my point is that it's Australian politics. One of the failures of its change over the past generation, okay? Yep. From when we had a lot of money and they just came up with ways to give it to you, to where we sit today and all the governments up and down and in between. This night, budget night, has been turned from economic national statement into what's in it for you.
Yep.
Everyone has got used to, Michael, in a political generation, that the next day your favourite news site will have a little thing saying, calculator, put in how much you earn and see what happens, right? So governments are locked in this debt spiral, and I mean financial debt spiral and structural debt spiral with the budget. The last people to try and do something about it, Joe Hockey, and we all know the disgrace that was thrown in his way when they were trying to fix the structural problem. They were trying to cut the cancer, but the cancer gets worse. How do you think, is the challenge now about the way people remember 275? Is it up to the marketing of Labor versus the marketing of the Liberal Party, or is there a normal X factor in the suburbs that says, hang on, mate, you said you were going to stop the boats and you didn't, or in Abbott's case, you did?
So, mate, it's many things. First of all, governments federally always get a second term. Okay, that's not a law, but so the likelihood is he gets a second term because history tells you that.
But in minority.
Secondly, Labor, they'll be in minority. Secondly, they did a magnificent job tarnishing Scott Morrison's credibility, as explained, and the Liberal Party federally, by the way, were hopeless at defending Morrison. Right? You never see a Labor leader attacked in the way that Scott was without the Labor Party coming out to defend them. All cannons are bellowing in support of the leader. They hardly lifted a finger to help Morrison's credibility, which is one of the reasons they lost. But, mate, when you get into a government like this, right, no one ever thought Albanese was Hawke or a Keating or even as good as Kevin Rudd, right? But they were off Morrison. They'd been in government 10 years, 3 prime ministers. They were giving Albo a go because, Richard and everyone said Conroy and everyone said he's a good bloke, Albo, give him a go. So we all give Albo a go. Now the electorate's thinking, is this bloke any good? He seems to have lost control of everything. The borders, the immigration system, the detainees, inflation, government spending, crime, anti-Semitism, Palestine.
Take your pick.
Take your pick. This bloke doesn't seem to be succeeding at anything. Now he's on this green energy binge. He's now a $22 billion venture capitalist. He's smarter than all these venture capitalists around the world. I think people are very worried about this this made in Australia, billions and billions flowing into venture capital. That's basically what it is. Why doesn't he do something smarter? Give the $22 billion to industries in Australia where we have a competitive advantage, and let all the other countries who are bigger, and have more money than us, spend all their venture capital money on green hydrogen, etc. Right? And when they've wasted it all, because the fourth incarnation gets it right, when they've spent all that money blowing it all up, and they finally get it right, then we'll buy the technology. But in the meantime, Albo, let's spend money in the farming industry, the mining industry, the services, all industries where Australia has a competitive advantage, pharmaceuticals, etc.
I also think that when we're talking about priorities and governments making decisions about what to spend money on, there's one sector, and it's not. This is just about decency. It's not about votes. But I think if you want to, I can make a case for the votes. I haven't gone deep into the budget to see what happens here, but rather than this sort of piecemeal this and that, I would like to see if Australia's in a cost of living crisis, which we are. 3.7 million people haven't been able to. They've been in food insecurity. People literally remember the cost of living inquiry out of Western Australia. When the feds went over there, they heard stories about people who were freezing. All they wanted was a block of ice so that it'd keep the food cold that was in the car, and then it would melt and become the water they would drink the next day, right? Give money to charities. Give serious help to the people on the front lines to make sure that those who are, like that bloke that we showed you a couple of nights ago, who was talking to SBS, that he was in a house. He was in a house in Queensland, but his rent went up, so now he's living by the side of the road. I think that Australians want from politics at the moment, they want a massive idea on housing affordability. I think they want a massive idea on helping those that are the most unfortunate at the moment. And Joe, because of the complications of inflation, et cetera, we don't get that. If a government came out and said, we're going to pass a law tomorrow that says no financial institution can demand more than 10% as a deposit for your house. Yeah. All right? Now, again, the economists will be screaming and yelling at the telly right now, but I'm saying that's what's going to move the needle. This sort of garbage, and I'm just, while we're talking, I'm trying to look at the news websites, and one of the lefty ones is saying huge cost of living relief, when we all know it ain't.
No, it's not huge cost of living relief. And again, it can't be. And I hate to sound like a broken record, but they can't do. I would love to see them do some really big stuff on this like that, but they kind of can't because of the environment. They are doing really big things on Indigenous housing and Indigenous education.
But rather than hydrogen, which makes Twiggy Forrest happy, Daniel Andrews happy, Malcolm Turnbull happy, as well as all of them getting help with their power bills, why not move $1 billion into the charity sector?
Well, because
so that the people we all care about, a lot
of what the government's doing is the sort of stuff that charities are doing anyway. So, for example, rent assistance. I mean, this is the sort of thing. And again,
but trying to invent green hydrogen as the future of the world,
honestly, mate, if that pays off, right? Yes, there is a bit of risk involved.
Sure, if you can invent
if that pays off, if Australia becomes a green hydrogen leader, it could be an absolute game changer. It is extraordinary the potential we have because, frankly, the really heavy
Sure, but you're about to go into a structural deficit of tens of billions of dollars. Is that the time to be trying to reinvent the wheel? Trying to say, we will fund the project that will, rediscover electricity?
Because what you want to be doing is, if, God willing there won't be, but if there is a recession or a softening of the economy, which is there is definitely going to be a softening, right? We're trying to avoid a recession. What you want to do is back-end load all that big infrastructure spending to keep the economy going and to make sure that it's going in the areas that are Australia's strengths, and that is in critical minerals, that is in someone like...
Let venture capital fund it, because if they strike the idea that... No, Twiggy's not doing it. Twiggy's doing it and asking for money, and this government's going to turn around and give him and his political mates, Andrews and Turnbull, money off their freaking power bills. If there's a great idea, the billionaire can fund the great idea.
Tax cuts, and now they're going to get thousands of dollars in tax cuts.
My point is, hey, come on. Every household means the richest one as well. And if so that's the
That's
idea.
Right, but they're getting far less than they were going to under the previous government.
All right, we've got plenty more. Quick break, back with more. Lots to talk about, including, some announcement about supermarkets. Does it actually move the needle or change anything? We'll find out with the lads. Jane Hume joins us in a second as well. She's the Shadow Finance Minister. No doubt she wants to talk about 30,000 extra public servants on top of the record number that we currently have. We know budgets are more about politics than economics because the reality is it's all about winners and losers, as you see all over much of the media. It's also about the very simple messages that people are going to argue about in the next little while between Team Red and Team Blue. The captain of Team Red is the Prime Minister, and here he is with a message just for you.
Hi, I wanted to talk to you about one of the major announcements we have in tonight's budget, and that's from July 1. Every household will get $300 off their energy bills. That's all households, not just some. Just like every taxpayer will receive a tax cut from July 1. All 13.6 million, not just some. That's part of our cost of living relief in tonight's budget, which we know is the number one priority. Tax cuts for every taxpayer, energy bill relief for every household.
Written, spoken and authorised, you get the point. Jane Hume is the Shadow Finance Minister and she joins us now from Canberra. So, you know what the line here is? It's every household, it's every taxpayer. What's your response to that premise and about the reality for the Australians that, as the Treasurer said today, the tax cut is, less than a carton of beer a week and the energy relief is $25 a month?
Well, I think Albo was right on one thing. That was that this budget is a typical Labor budget through and through. It's big tax, big spend, and quite frankly, it's a con job because it's not going to tackle the number one issue, being the cost of living, because it cannot bring inflation down sustainably. It's throwing subsidies at the problem rather than dealing with the problem at the source. There's $315 billion in additional spending since Labor came to government. That's an eye-watering amount. In fact, it's the biggest amount of spending that we've seen in a budget, bar the pandemic years, for about 40 years, since back in the Hawke and Keating days at the beginning of the 1980s. For every $1 of savings that they've made, they've actually spent $4. Now, the RBA are no fools. As much as Jim Chalmers might like to replace the board with people that he's picked, they're pretty sure that they know that any changes that they've made in this budget aren't actually going to sustainably bring inflation down. And because of that, interest rates are going to stay higher for longer, and Australian, particularly mortgage holders, are going to pay the price.
Earlier in the show, when I was trying to go through the 5 things that I've noticed about the budget, I make this point that in this budget, if the claim is electricity, and I don't believe it changes anything in that world, just look at the inflation figures from last month, right? Everything from tobacco, petrol, bread, rent, all of it way up. Now, you've been chairing the cost of living committee that goes around the country, and the types of people who come to those committees or you hear about how massive their concerns are. We're talking about people with jobs who live in their car. This budget does not change their life, yet the Prime Minister and the Treasurer are going to spend the next however many months telling us that everyone benefits, despite the fact that the people who truly need it are the working poor, and I can't see anything here.
No, the cost of living crisis is clearly the number one issue. We are hearing the most horrendous stories of people coming to seek services from charities that have never been there before, people with 2 incomes, people with multiple jobs, people with mortgages are now lining up at Food Bank to help put food on the table. Les Twentyman, the great Les Twentyman, may he rest in peace, did appear before the committee, before the Cost of Living Committee, just before he died actually, and told us the most saddest story, which was about a woman that had pawned her wedding ring to pay for kids' school uniforms. I reckon the announcements in tonight's budgets are going to be cold comfort to families like that. Yes, everyone's going to appreciate some energy bill relief, but in the long term, that's not going to tackle the big issue. It's only a band-aid on a bullet hole. Unless you can bring inflation down sustainably, well, it's simply not going to make a dent in people's lives. And the only way you're going to be able to do that with energy prices is to increase supply into the system, not go on these ideological jaunts into whatever you think the future made in Australia might look like.
Now, we know the noise the Labor Party made in the lead up to the last election, and we're not fighting the last election. The world is always looking forward, and when I say we, I mean collectively Australia and what we're going to be debating, just in case the umpires are going to run off to somebody, that Karen's going to run off to the umpire. We've got this scenario where $1 trillion debt, $1 trillion debt, $1 trillion debt is what they talked about before. By their own forecasts, if they have paid off 80, 90 billion, the budget goes into such deep deficits over the next few years that we go back to a position of being even worse than when they took over. What does it say to you as a document about how the federal budget is put together, that at its heart, apart from the sugar hits of excise taxes and resources, that the joint is hundreds of billions of dollars in the wrong direction?
And you think what a waste the last couple of years have been, because there have been some pretty serious windfall gains that have been presented in this document to Jim Chalmers. To use his former boss's, his former idol's words, he has been hit in the arse by a rainbow by those iron ore and coal company tax receipts. You know, the commodity prices have gone up so high that company tax receipts have gone through the roof. And of course, personal income tax receipts have gone up too because of bracket creep. Inflation is bad for all Australians. You know, it's the thief in the night that eats away at your savings and erodes your purchasing power and reduces your standard of living. But governments love it because it pushes everybody up into that next higher tax bracket. And of course, they get, more income receipts, more revenue, which is fantastic for your budget bottom line, and that's what's returned the surpluses. But rather than actually using that surplus to pay down the debt, instead they've continued to spend. And they've spent on things that, quite frankly, we're not seeing the benefit from. One of them, and the one that really gets up my wick, is 36,000 new public servants. 36,000 new public servants since Labor came to government. Now, just to put that into perspective, that's more than all of the people that work for Westpac. It's more than all of the people, all of the people that work for Telstra. And they are now Canberra bureaucrats, just hired in the last 2 years alone. That is eye-watering, because I don't know about you, Paul, but I don't feel like I'm getting 36,000 new public servants better off in terms of service that I'm receiving from the government.
No, not at all. To me, it feels like it's, again, an extension of what we've seen with, say, Daniel Andrews, Palaszczuk to a degree here, which is Labor wants to build permanent majorities, electoral majorities, by you are either dependent on the government for your job, or you are dependent on the government in terms of the handout, or if you're a business, your biggest client is the government, right? And hence we saw how that has worked, and in my view, to the detriment of places like the great states of Victoria and Queensland. Jane, nice to talk to you. We'll talk again soon.
Great to be with you, Paul.
Jane Hume, the Shadow Finance Minister, always on it, and I appreciate her joining us this evening. Back to the debate with Michael and Joe straight after this quick break on Paul Murray Live. 90-minute edition of the show at the top of the hour. The late debate is pulling the late shift tonight. I really appreciate you being here this evening, as well as the wonderful Michael Kroger and the equally wonderful Joe Hildebrand. Getting late for some, but not for us. We're just getting started as always.
We're doing an all-nighter live rolling coverage. Live rolling coverage of the world's most boring budget. Can I just say, you guys have your freedom. I was in the lockup for 6 hours.
Oh, no!
And then I come here and we're still talking about...
Oh, no. And they're all walking around going, well, have you seen page 76? And you go, OK, right.
We call those people the Australian.
Yeah. All right, God love the Oz.
We love
all right.
We love you, the Oz.
One of the things that was in the Treasurer's speech, again, obviously one of the issues in and around cost of living, but particularly groceries, right? I want to play part of his speech and then try to decode what the hell he's saying, because, again, normal people don't sit around and watch this speech at 7:30, but the government trying to front load it as something you should know about means I want to decode it. Roll the tape.
Speaker, we know that Australians are feeling the pinch at the checkout. That's why we empowered the competition watchdog to hold supermarkets accountable. That's why we're taking steps to make the food and grocery code mandatory and making our economy more competitive across the board by strengthening the mergers regime and abolishing nuisance tariffs and reducing compliance costs for business. Because more competition means more choices, means lower prices and better services and better jobs.
means I'm going to pay less for meat this year, Joe?
Means it's not his fault.
Okay.
Funny you should bring this up because I had the great privilege, I think it's under my name, otherwise the cover's blown. The Daily Telegraph always does the what he said, what he meant.
Yes, good.
Me and Tim Blair often take turns doing it, but Tim was feeling a bit lazy today, so I did it. But and that was one of the quotes that I plucked out. And the other one was, of course, there's international turmoil. These are very febrile economic times and all this.
That's code for Trump's going to be president?
So
I don't know.
Basically what he's saying is, I don't know if you've seen the movie Good Will Hunting.
Of course I have.
The very famous scene where Robin Williams, counsellor character, grabs Matt Damon and says, "It's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault." And I had Jim Chalmers basically saying, that is what I want you to do to me.
Yeah, it's not my fault.
It's not his fault. It's the supermarket's fault. It's the nebulous global forces' fault. And to a very large extent, he is right. But that's definitely the message.
But as it was in 22. But again, everything was personal. Now everything's cyclical. Michael, again, how do you decode that language? Because again, it is just a whole series of things that make it seem like, ice cream's going to be less, but I don't think it's going to be.
So, mate, Joe's absolutely right. This government's never made a mistake. They've never got anything wrong.
Never.
Have you heard one minister ever say, we messed this up? Not even take an extreme example, this fellow Giles, Andrew Giles. Nope. Is he going anywhere? Nope. Is he resigning? Nope. Nope. He's staying where he is. Claire O'Neill? Nope. I mean, no one's made a mistake and no one's got anything wrong, which is why, as I said earlier on, the jury's out.
Yeah,
they're looking at this bloke Albanese saying, I'm not sure you're all that good. I didn't think you were all that good as opposition leader because you couldn't even remember the unemployment rate. I'm not sure you're that smart. I don't know your team's that good. I know the Morrison's expired. The Morrison government's expired. I'm a bit sick of Scott and the Liberals, so we'll give you a go. And you've promised all these things. Maybe you are a genius. And now they're looking at him thinking, you never admit a mistake. You've cocked up so many things. You lied to us about cost of living. All this stuff about inflation. We're now being bought off by Jim Chalmers in, 82 cents a day for our energy bills relief. You said it was easy to fix cost of living. Why have we still got all this massive interest rate? Why is interest rates, home loans at 6 and 7%, Albo? You said all this was easy. So the jury are now thinking, hey, and they work this stuff out. They can't go to an election until interest rates have gone down probably 2 months in a row. Otherwise, the punters out there thinking you are just bulldust artists.
Yeah.
We don't believe a word you're telling us.
But even then, I was talking about this with a friend before the show, which was, okay, so the cost of living squeeze or interest rates or whatever the problem is that particularly concerns you, right? The python is squeezing you so you're like Ribena purple, right? But you're only now going to be ever so slightly violet. So they think they're going to vote for you? That's what I don't understand, right? Which is that, it's not as bad as it was is never really a great tactic to win over a room. But I want to go through a couple of other quick things before we finish, including university places. Now, it seemed that the Treasurer was talking about even more people being able to go to university. Now, again, this is fine if the university degree equals a qualification for a job that means you don't have to import another person from overseas. But I'm not entirely sure that's what he said. Again, let us decode.
Tonight we're setting a national target of 8 out of 10 workers achieving a tertiary qualification by 2050, and we're backing it in with new funding reforms to meet this goal. We're investing $350 million for fee-free uni-ready courses. These courses give those who would have missed out on studying a degree a foot in the door.
Now, in fairness, tertiary education does also mean trades, but that's not what his focus was, Joe. Decode.
No, I think that is actually his. That is very much part of his focus. And
but he just said uni-ready, which means uni.
They had a big package. Well, the uni is where a lot of the new sort of high-end, high-tech jobs are coming from. So that's right, the STEM stuff. So it's going to be that, and it's going to be the service industry, so aged care, childcare. That's where all the big demand is going to be. But people are going to have to use the unfortunate phrase of Hillary Clinton, learn to code. Thank God I'll be dead before that happens. But the So it is very much a focus on uni. It is very much focused on TAFE as well. And Jason Clare, his absolute evangelical mission, I was shocked to learn this, but the rate of people actually even just getting to the end of high school has dropped by about 10%, even more if you count, from about 83% in public schools to now 73% in public schools. So people aren't even getting their HSC, let alone getting into uni. So to have 80% of people actually get a tertiary qualification, TAFE or uni, whatever it may be, is actually on top of that again, because that's finishing year 12 and then going on further study. And that is what people will need to do to be job ready and to get those jobs. And that is a real, I can promise you, that is a really genuine man on a mission.
And look, I hope he achieves that. But Michael, isn't the reality too that we need builders and electricians and welders and a whole bunch of other people, because the bigger the country gets, the more things need to be built, and, you know, God forbid, those of us who don't have new houses need them renovated and fixed up. So to me, you know, Labor always goes back to this university thing. And while Joe says that, yes, there's detail there about TAFE, I think if you're trying to talk to normal Australia, saying it's okay for your kid to pick up a tool and we'll be more than happy to back them in and we'll help them do it, because there's a good chance they'll be earning more than the Prime Minister at one point in their life. Maybe.
Well, mate, pre-Whitlam, they didn't like the university students because they voted Liberal and the tradies voted Labor. After Whitlam, it's gone the other way. So all the working class tradies, the self-employed, etc., tending to vote for the Conservative Party, and all the, a majority of the students are tending to vote, the tertiary students are tending to vote for the Labor Party. So, yeah, it's a strange juxtaposition to hear a Labor government not championing, you know, the skills of those people that can work with their hands. I mean, I wish I'd, you know, been great with my hands 100%. At school. You know, I watch carpenters at work, and I had a bloke round the other day. I was just in awe of his skill. I mean, these joiners are these people that can cut wood and fix it. These people are freaks. They're geniuses. You know, much better, smarter than, you know, lawyers that I used to be. These guys are, you know, and women should be on pedestals. So Labor seem to, you know, it's part of this. What's happened from the 70s onwards is sort of, you know. It's to be frowned upon. You know, we're the working class. No, we're part of that. As Labor have morphed into this sort of Whitlam, upper middle class, sort of upper class, inner city woke sort of world dinner party set where, you know, it's all about, you know, they're the people I mix with now, Kate Blanchett. They mix with Kate and Garen said baby.
We call them Radio National.
That's right. Rest assured, Michael, I share your concerns. I've been working overtime to try to reverse that trend. Right. But Labor, to its great defence, has put a lot of money into TAFE, fee-free TAFE, to get those skills up. So it has really been doing it.
I got to jump. Thank you guys. Do appreciate it tonight. Got plenty more to say. We'll do so on the other side. Ahead of the late debate, about 5 minutes away here on Sky News. It is the privilege of a lifetime to have this job. It is a particular privilege each and every year to be able to tell you exactly what I think about the people in power and how they use your money. I appreciate being part of the budget coverage here on Sky News, and it continues now with the late debate.